Hello everyone, this is Crota, now coming at you with Week 2 patch notes by David Kim. Now, Week 2 patch notes for Heart of the Swarm, a lot of them make sense, and a lot of them made me scratch my head a little bit. More on them as we hit them one at a time. Now, first things first, Preordain is no longer in the game. So Preordain has been removed from the game. Instead, they decided to keep Revelation, and they added a new ability to the Oracle called Phase Shield. Phase Shield, temporary buff that makes sure that your units cannot be affected by certain spells, such as Fungal Growth, Concussive Shells, the Viper's Abduct. Spells and effects like that, very, very nice, should be very effective as the Oracle has turned more into a defensive and utility spellcaster as opposed to just a harassing spellcaster. Cloaking Field and Phase Shield, both of them are going to be very effective early on in the game. Really, really excited to see that. Another change is that the Oracle Entombed the duration has been decreased, but the health of the shields have been increased. The overall effect is professional players will end up losing more minerals, while amateur players won't lose nearly as many. That I do agree with, as no one wants to all of a sudden lose out on 300, 400 resources just because they were unable to keep track of the minimap, especially as a casual player, as there's really no indication that your units are under attack, but you look around the minimap and go, you know what, I don't see anything in my base that's getting really attacked. I don't see anything that indicates that there's a unit there, since the Oracle moves that quickly, and you may simply just ignore it. Now, the Oracle cost has also been reduced from 150 over 200 to 150 over 150. The reasoning behind this is to get more players to use the Oracle. Will that be the final cost? I'm not sure. 150 is a rather, cheap unit there, or still an expensive unit, excuse me. So we'll see what comes of that. Now, this was perhaps the biggest shocker for me. The Warhound has been removed from the game. The Warhound being removed from the game really doesn't give Terran much to look forward to in terms of the Heart of the Swarm beta. They currently have Battle Hellions, which is just a beefier Hellion. It doesn't feel like that big of a change. They still have the Widow Mines. Widow Mines did get a definite buff, though. More on that later. Hopefully, I think David Kim did address it in this post. But without the Warhound, the Terran just seems to fall a little bit flat. I'll come to my conclusions towards the end. Let's go ahead and just head through these patch notes. The Carrier has arrived again once more. I guess that's redundant. The Carrier is back. And a lot of players were saying, you know what, the Tempest, even though it is a capital ship for the Protoss, I don't really like it. It's one of those capital ships that you kind of have to babysit a little bit more, as opposed to create them in a move with them while having a smaller army, such as your Stalkers, your Zealots, or High Templars. The capital ships were more of those units where you didn't have to micro them as much. You didn't have to worry about them getting shot down too quickly. The Tempests were definitely more of those strategic units, as opposed to those giant units in the back that you didn't really have to worry about. Now, Mothership Core has been really ramped up. Mothership Core cost has now been reduced, so that is going to be a definite buff. Also, the recall energy on the Mothership Core has been reduced from 150 to 100, and I absolutely agree with this. I think from 150 to 100 is a little bit high. I think maybe 125 is a good amount for recall. Normally, you won't be spending that much energy on your Mothership Core. You got to remember, it's more of a back-at-home base type of thing. So it's not going to be too uncommon to actually have around 200, 150, 175 energy on your Mothership Core. The last thing you really want to see is a Mothership Core actually attacking one base. It does move really slow, and then recall to another part of your opponent's base, and then have the Mothership Core slowly back away and then be able to retreat with all of those units. That may be a little bit powerful, but then again, it will take some time for pro players to really be able to utilize the Mothership Core that much, especially with its lower movement speed. Also, the Purify attack range has been increased from 7 to 10. If you guys don't know how big of a buff that is, That is absolutely huge. The Purify attack range is actually greater than a Broodlord. Broodlord is 9.5. The attack range is now up to 10. That is going to be huge. It really balances out the Mothership Purify attack, especially against Terran players, as Terran players will be utilizing Marines, and you may not want to risk your Mothership core of trying to attack, but with a little bit more range, more than double the range of a Marine, you can perhaps do a little bit of kiting or play around with it a little bit more. So those are some nice changes. Moving down the line, Tempest attack range now is at 15, and it now does additional damage versus massive. This is absolutely huge. The Tempest is now a very, very long range attack unit that attacks air and ground and can also be covered and by protection from stalkers. That was the huge, huge key. In Protoss late game, the problem was that Broodlord Infestor was so difficult and Corruptor was so difficult to actually try and protect any sort of air units, such as your Void Rays or your carriers, because of fungal growth and units like that. The Tempest with a range of 15 can shoot from the back, hitting the all-important Broodlords or hitting those Infestors, and then Stalkers can still be within range to cover those Tempests if Corruptors get too close. Now, the Reaper has a new passive ability that is not upgraded from what I hear, and it is Battlefield Awareness. It gives them a little bit look before you leap ability. They can actually see up cliffs and then jump off and then perhaps jump up or choose to jump up as opposed to jumping straight into a group of Marines or Marauders. Now, one of the things that this will do is that it will introduce Reapers into mid-game play. Mid-game play with Reapers, you rarely ever see them unless you're trying to do some sort of crazy later harass, but that normally is not effective as, say, Hellions or anything with a large amount of splash damage. So Reaper with Battlefield Awareness, I really like this ability, but I don't think players will really create more than 2 or 3 of these Reapers for that Battlefield Awareness unless for some reason they can, unless for some reason they then become able to detect cloaked units as part of their Battlefield Awareness. But then again, that would be really strong and then would give Terran way too much detection. Now, the new Hellion upgrade, quote-unquote Hellion upgrade, is not really an upgrade. It is a debuff to Terran players, as Hellions can no longer initially change from battle mode into the car mode or whatever, race car mode, whatever you want to call it. There is a change though, as the factory, you can change whether or not you want to build the car variation or the battle Hellion variation, which is very important. It allows you to choose whether or not you want a beefy or tanky unit in the early game, or if you want that harassment unit, and then you can only swap them out after you have the upgrade. That's going to be very important, as I believe Terran players were getting a little bit too creative with those Hellions early on, driving the Hellions, getting them where they needed to go very quickly, transforming them, and then transforming back. It will close the window of their early game viability without completely shutting down the early battle Hellion. Now, one of my favorite changes is the Widow Mine no longer has an armory requirement. This is to encourage Widow Mines to be used more heavily. I do not know if this one particular upgrade or buff for the Widow Mine will make it into Heart of the Swarm in terms of the final multiplayer, but it was something that Blizzard needs to do in order to encourage players to use the Widow Mine. Now, let's continue down the line. Swarm Host Locust costs attack range decreased from 3 to 2. This was definitely something that needed to happen. Locusts were very powerful in the early game, in that the Locusts could just constantly send waves, and even with a good amount of Marines with that 5 range, if you had enough Locusts stacked up on top of each other, as they were flooding, the Marines couldn't actually destroy the Locusts in time, and even Hellions with Blue Flame research couldn't destroy the Locusts in time before the Locusts would actually deal a fair amount of damage. That was quite a bit of a problem. I am very happy to see this change here. Now, my thoughts on the patch in general, I'll make a note to go to the 9-minute 50-second mark. My thoughts on the patch in general, it really feels like Blizzard is purposely making it so that we are trying new units. I do not think this is going to be the final patch, obviously. And what they really need to see is they need to see players test out more of the units, the Widow Mines, and they're balancing things as they see fit. The Warhound was such a great unit that Terran players were only utilizing the Warhound and not even trying the Widow Mines. So will we see the Warhound come back in? Perhaps. Is it going to get a nerf? Most likely. I really do want to see the Warhound come back in, though, as it really was the only unit that I was truly excited about for Terran. Now, if the Warhound doesn't come back, and this patch was to go public, and this was the patch that we used for multiplayer Heart of the Swarm, I would think Terran would be on the short end of the stick, not just because I'm a Terran player, but because the state of the metagame in Wings of Liberty. Hear me out. Wings of Liberty right now, I've talked to professional players and got their thoughts. Terran players are really, really strong mid-game. Terran players try to get to the mid-game as quickly as possible and then win in the mid-game or extend the mid-game as long as possible. If they cannot extend the mid-game, then they are currently losing to Protoss and Zerg majority of the time. I'm not saying that Terran late game always loses. I'm saying that it's very, very difficult for a Terran player to really get back into the game once it does get into the late game. Now, with the changes to Queens, with the changes to Swarm Host, and with the changes to Protoss with the Purify upgrades on the mothership, and with the removal of the Warhound, what that does for Terran is that their mid-game harassments and their early game harassments are not going to be nearly as strong. Purify with a range of 10 means that it's going to be very difficult for a Terran player to try to do anything during the early stages of the mid-game, as that Purify range is so great that they can actually take out units very, very easily. So it's adding some additional defense to Protoss in the early mid-game. Also, Queens already have the 5 range upgrade, so it's been very difficult for Terran players to try and harass mineral lines. As professional players get better, and as things start to flesh out, I really think the direction that, if this is the ultimate direction that Blizzard is trying to take the game, the direction is not going to be favorable for Terran, as it's going to really limit the number of builds even further for Terran, and it's going to emphasize the fact that they got to win an early or mid game, otherwise they have really no late game concepts. One of the things that wasn't mentioned is that battle cruisers no longer have that hyperdrive over overdrive ability. So tier 3 Terran, from what you see right now in Wings of Liberty, is essentially the same in Heart of the Swarm as well. So there is no late game Terran at this point. Let me know what you guys think. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. A 14-minute video of me just talking and you guys being able to read. Thanks for watching.